Have you ever wondered if there's a limit to what someone would do for love? I discovered there isn't, and that discovery cost me my entire childhood. Hi, my darlings. I'm Grandma Rose. I'm 73 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story I've carried in my heart for over 50 years. A story that began in a small town you probably haven't heard of, Millfield, in rural Kentucky, and completely changed the course of my life. But before I begin, I'd like you to do something for me. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching this video from. I want to know if there are folks from Kentucky here too, or if you're from other corners of this vast country. And while you're at it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell, because stories like this one don't come along every day. Now let's get to what really matters. My parents. My father, Sebastian, was a simple man. He worked in a small auto repair shop in downtown Millfield. His hands were always stained with grease, but his heart was as pure as spring water. He was the kind of man you'd look at and think, that's a good person. And he truly was. The problem is that he had a flaw that ended up being fatal. He loved too much. When I say too much, I'm not exaggerating. It was a love that was painful to witness, a love that made him forget everything, himself, me, the entire world, just to please her. Her, my mother, Constance. Folks, if you could have seen my mother when she was young, she was truly breathtaking. Tall, with pitch-black hair that shined in the sun, green eyes that looked like two emeralds. But you know that kind of beauty that intimidates, that makes you feel small just by looking at it? That's how she was. Constance had come from a small town in Tennessee, even smaller than Millfield, with a cardboard suitcase and a past that no one knew much about. Small-town folks whispered things, you know. They said she'd been married before, that she'd run away, that she'd done things a respectable woman wouldn't do. But my father didn't care about gossip. He only saw those green eyes, and that was it. He was lost. I was born 3 months after they were married. Do the math. I grew up watching my father humiliate himself for her every day. And when I say humiliate, I mean exactly that. She spoke, he obeyed. She asked, he ran after it. She complained, he apologized, even when he hadn't done anything wrong. It was painful to watch, but it was my reality. I remember once when I was about 8 years old, she wanted a dress she'd seen in a store in Louisville, an expensive dress that cost more than my father earned in 2 months. I watched him count and recount the money he had saved in the coffee can, saw him sigh deeply, and in the end, he borrowed money from his boss to buy that dress. When he came home with the bag, she barely thanked him, took the dress, looked it over and said, I thought it would be better. That's all. My father just stood there with that awkward smile, trying to hide his disappointment. But you know what the worst part was? He thought he deserved that treatment. He truly believed that a woman like her was doing him a favor by staying with a man like him. And she knew it. Oh, how she knew it. Constance had a dangerous intelligence. She knew exactly where to press to make my father feel small, inadequate, lucky to have her. When he came home tired from work, she would say, Sebastian, you don't even realize how I sacrificed staying in this house, in this backwater town, because of you. When he tried to be affectionate, she would sigh and say, Oh, you're so simple, aren't you? You don't understand anything about life? And my father swallowed it all in silence. Worse still, he agreed with her. I saw all this and felt such rage inside. I wanted to scream, to shake him, and ask why he let her talk to him like that. But I was just a girl, and back then, children didn't meddle in adult business. So I just sat there watching my father wither away with love, because that's what was happening. He was withering away. With each passing year, he grew thinner, more hunched, more faded, as if she were slowly sucking the life out of him. And the strangest thing was that the more she mistreated him, the more he clung to her. It was as if her cruelty was confirmation that he truly didn't deserve anything better. A sick relationship that I only understood years later, when it was already too late. Constance didn't work. She said a woman like her didn't need to work outside the home, that a married woman's place was at home. But she didn't really take care of the house either. I was the one who cooked from an early age. I was the one who washed the clothes. I was the one who swept, ironed, organized. It was always me. She would sit on the porch, brushing that beautiful hair and complaining about the heat, about life, about everything. When I was about 12, I started to better understand adult conversations. The neighbors would speak softly when they passed by our house, but I would listen. They said Constance sometimes received letters that she hid from my father. They said she would go out sometimes during the afternoon and return with new things, a lipstick, a comb, once even a necklace, but never explained where they came from. My father pretended not to notice, or maybe he truly didn't see. He was so blinded by love that any suspicion that might cross his mind, he would suppress it himself. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to face the possibility of losing her. But I saw, and I began to feel afraid. Not afraid of being hit or punished, but a deeper, darker fear. The fear that this woman was capable of anything to maintain control over my father, and that my father was capable of anything to keep her. It was like living in a house built on top of a volcano. You knew it would explode someday. You just didn't know when or how. And there I was, a 14-year-old girl waiting for the explosion and hoping to survive it. What I didn't know was that when it finally came, it would be in a way that not even my worst nightmare had imagined. I was 16 when Constance started getting sick. It was in the middle of summer 1967. I remember it well because it was the same month that rumors had started about a possible conflict between the world's great powers at the time. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was watching my mother waste away before my eyes. It started with a dry cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the shortness of breath, the extreme fatigue, the skin that slowly turned yellowish. The doctor in Millfield couldn't tell what it was. So my father spent all his savings to take her to a hospital in Louisville. Lung cancer, advanced stage. When the doctor broke the news, my father collapsed. Literally collapsed. He fell to his knees right there in the hospital corridor and started crying like a child. I had never seen a man cry like that, with sobs that seemed to come from deep within his soul. Constance, on the other hand, remained silent. Those green eyes were fixed on the doctor, as if she were calculating something in her head, and perhaps she was. The doctor said she had 6 months at most. My father asked if there was no treatment, no medicine, nothing he could do. The doctor shook his head with pity and said the most he could do was give her pain medication. On the way back to Millfield, in that old, noisy bus, Constance held my father's hand and said something that gave me chills. "Sebastian, now you're going to prove how much you really love me." I was sitting right behind them, but she spoke so softly I could barely hear. My father just squeezed her hand and murmured, "Anything, Constance, anything." In the months that followed, she became a queen. A dying queen, but still a queen. My father stopped going to work regularly to take care of her. He took leave, then was fired, but he didn't care. He just wanted to be there by her side, catering to her every whim. And the whims became stranger, more demanding, more cruel. She wanted him to sleep on the floor next to her bed, so he would always be close if she needed anything. He did. She wanted him to bathe her, to brush her hair, even when it started falling out because of the medicine. He did everything. But the worst were the tests. Constance began to invent tests of love. Small at first, then increasingly larger, increasingly more humiliating. She made my father promise absurd things. Once she said she wanted him to burn all the photos he had from before he met her. My father hesitated. They were photos of his family, of his parents who had already died. But in the end, he burned everything in the backyard. Another time she said she wanted him to sell his wedding ring to buy an expensive medicine she had seen in a newspaper. My father sold the ring, bought the medicine, and later discovered it was useless. Constance laughed when she found out. Actually laughed, as if it were a joke. I watched my father being torn apart piece by piece and couldn't do anything. I tried talking to him once. I asked why he subjected himself to all that. He looked at me with such lost, desperate eyes that I wanted to cry. "Rose," he said, "your mother is dying, and when someone you love is dying, you do anything to show that love is real. Anything. Anything." That word echoed in my head for days. Constance grew physically weaker and weaker, but psychologically she seemed stronger than ever. It was as if the proximity of death had awakened in her a desperate need for control, for power, for total domination over my father. She began to say strange things. She said that when she died, she would be watching him from somewhere and would know if he had really loved her or if it was all a lie. She said she had a final test saved, a test that would prove once and for all if his love was true or if he was like all the other men she had known in her life. My father listened to all this and agreed, swearing he would pass any test, that he would prove his love in any way she wanted. I felt a knot in my stomach every time I heard these conversations. There was something very wrong in the air, a tension that went beyond the sadness of a person dying. It was a dangerous tension, as if Constance were preparing something terrible. In March 1968, she stopped getting out of bed. The cancer had completely taken over her body. She was a shadow of what she had been, but those green eyes continued to shine with a frightening intensity, an intensity that didn't seem natural in a person who was dying. It was during this time that she began to look at me differently, not with the usual disdain, but with a strange curiosity, as if she were evaluating me for something. I was 17, already had a woman's body, and I felt that her gaze was measuring this, weighing this, calculating this. One night I woke up to the sound of her calling my father. It was about 2 a.m, and she was whispering his name with an urgency that made me get up from bed and peek through the crack in their bedroom door. Constance was lying down, but propped up on her elbows, her eyes fixed on my father, who was sleeping on the floor next to the bed. She was smiling, a smile that froze my blood, because it wasn't a smile of affection or longing. It was a smile of someone who had just had a very bad idea. "Sebastian," she whispered, "wake up, it's time." My father woke up startled, as he always did when she called him. "What is it, my love? Are you in pain? Do you want me to get your medicine?" "No," she said, and her voice was different, firmer, more determined. "I don't want medicine. I want to talk. Sit here on the bed." He sat down, and I could see that his hands were shaking. I don't know if from fear or exhaustion, but they were shaking. "Sebastian," she began, "you know I'm going to die soon. Don't say that, Constance. The doctor could be wrong. A new treatment could appear. Shut up and listen to me." She cut him off, and her voice came out harsher than she intended. She made an effort to soften it. "I'm sorry, my love, but I need to say this while I still have the strength." My father nodded, his eyes already welling up. "You've spent your whole life telling me you loved me," she continued, "that you would do anything for me. Anything. You remember?" "Of course I remember. And it's true." "Then, the time has come to prove it." The silence that followed was so heavy that I found it difficult to breathe. Constance was staring at my father with those green eyes, and he was looking at her with a mixture of adoration and terror that made me want to run away from there. But I didn't run. Something told me I needed to stay, that I needed to witness what was happening, as if my life depended on knowing what she was going to say next. "Sebastian," she whispered, and now her voice was filled with a poisonous sweetness. "Do you trust me with your life?" He answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Then you're going to do something for me. Something that will hurt a lot, that will be difficult, but that will prove forever that your love for me is greater than anything else in this world." My father swallowed hard. I saw the shadow of doubt pass through his eyes, quick as lightning, but he expelled it before it could take hold. "What do you want me to do?" Constance smiled again, and this time the smile was even more terrible because it was full of anticipated triumph. She knew she had already won the battle even before striking the first blow. "I want you to prove that you love me more than you love your own daughter." The world stopped. I swear it really stopped. Even the wind outside stopped blowing. My father was silent for a few seconds, as if he hadn't understood what she had said. Then he started shaking his head slowly, as if waking from a bad dream. "Constance, I don't understand." "Yes, you do. You understand perfectly." Her voice was now firm, relentless, the voice of someone who had finally removed the mask and was showing what she really was underneath. And that's when she spoke the words that changed my life forever. "I want you to sleep with Rose. I want you to take her as if she were your wife. Only then will I be sure that you love me more than anything else in this life. including more than your own morality. The silence that followed those words was the longest of my life. I was there, glued to the crack in the door, feeling my heart beat so hard I was sure they would hear it. My father was motionless, completely still, as if he had turned into a statue. For a moment, I thought he hadn't understood what she had said, but he had understood. And I saw on his face the exact moment when her words penetrated his mind and found their place. I saw the shock, saw the horror, saw the disbelief, but I also saw something that frightened me even more. I saw that he was considering it. "Constance," he whispered, and his voice came out so low it was barely audible. "You can't be serious?" She laughed, a soft laugh, almost affectionate, as if he had told an innocent joke. "Of course I'm serious, my love. I've never been more serious in my life." My father got up from the bed and started pacing back and forth in the small room. His hands were shaking so much that he had to intertwine his fingers to try to control them. I had never seen a human being in such despair. "Constance, this is my daughter. My daughter, do you understand? I can't. I would never." "Yes, you can," she interrupted, and now her voice was harder. "You can and you will, if you really love me. But this has nothing to do with love. This is, He couldn't even say the word. He just stood there, gesturing in the air, looking for a word that would describe the monstrosity of what she was asking. "This is what, Sebastian?" Constance asked, and now there was a dangerous coldness in her voice. "This is a crime? This is a sin? This is wrong? It's all of that. It's all of that and much more. So you're telling me that your morality is worth more than your love for me?" The question fell in the room like a bomb. My father stopped pacing and stood looking at her, his mouth open, unable to respond. "Is that what you're telling me, Sebastian? That after 20 years together, after I've dedicated my life to you, after everything we've been through, you're going to deny me this because your Christian morality is more important than I am?" "Constance, it's not a question of morality, it's a question of basic humanity. Rose is my daughter. And I am your wife," she shouted, and the shout came out with a force that didn't seem possible from such a weak body. "I am the woman you swore to love above all else. Remember your wedding vows, Sebastian? In joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, till death do us part." She paused to catch her breath, and when she continued, her voice was lower, more controlled, more dangerous. "Well, my dear, the time of sickness has come, the time of sorrow has come, and the time has come for you to prove if those vows were true or if they were just pretty words you said in church." My father sat down heavily in the chair that was in the corner of the room, put his face in his hands, and began to cry. A silent, desperate cry of someone who was being torn in two. "Please," he murmured between sobs, "don't ask this of me. Ask anything else, anything. You want me to kill myself? I'll kill myself. You want me to sell everything we have? I'll sell it. You want me to go away and never come back? I'll go. But don't ask this of me." Constance was silent for a long time, just watching him cry. And when she finally spoke, it was with a voice so sweet, so affectionate, that it became obscene. "Sebastian, my love, my life, don't you understand? I don't want you to kill yourself. I don't want you to go away. I want you to stay here with me, by my side, until my last moments. But I need to know that your love for me is real, that it's absolute, that it's greater than anything else." She paused, and I could hear her heavy breathing even from where I was standing. "Do you know why I'm asking this? Because throughout my life, Sebastian, I've known many men who said they loved me. Many. And all of them, when it came time to prove it, failed. All of them had something more important than me. Family, work, reputation, religion, morality. There was always something." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "But you, Sebastian, you were always different. You always told me I was more important than everything, that you would do anything for me, anything. And I believed it. I bet my whole life on that promise of yours." My father lifted his head from his hands and looked at her. His eyes were red, swollen from crying so much. "And now," she continued, "the time has come for you to fulfill that promise, to prove that I really am more important than everything. More important than your daughter? More important than your morality? More important than anything in this world? Constance, he began, but she interrupted him. No, Sebastian, there's no more discussion. Either you do this, or you admit you've always lied to me, that your love was always conditional, that I was never really the most important thing in your life. She took a deep breath, making an enormous effort to speak the next words. And if you admit that, Sebastian, I'll die knowing I wasted my entire life with a man who never truly loved me. And that pain will be worse than any cancer. My father was silent for a long time. I could see that he was waging a terrible battle inside his head. A battle between the sick love he felt for her and what remained of decency within him. She's just a girl, he murmured, more to himself than to Constance. She's 17 years old, Sebastian. She's not a child anymore. And besides, this isn't about her. It's about us. It's about you and me. It's about the love you swear you feel for me. But afterward, how will I live with this? Constance smiled, and this time the smile had a bit of genuine tenderness, as if she had finally heard the answer she wanted. Afterward, my love, you'll live knowing you proved your love in the most absolute way possible. You'll live knowing that when the time came, when you were truly tested, you didn't abandon me. You chose me. She extended her hand toward him. Come here, Sebastian. Come here with me. He hesitated for a few seconds, but then got up and went to the bed. He sat on the edge and took her hand. I know it's difficult, she whispered. I know it will hurt. But true love always hurts, doesn't it? True love always demands sacrifices. She squeezed his hand harder. And think of it this way. When I die, you'll be able to look at Rose and remember me. You'll remember how much you loved me. You'll remember the sacrifice you made for me. She'll be our eternal connection, Sebastian. The eternal proof of our love. My father closed his eyes, and I saw a tear roll down his face. When? He asked, and his voice came out so low it was almost inaudible. Now, she responded without hesitation. Now, while I still have the strength to see, while I can still witness your proof of love, here with you watching, here right by my side in my bed. I want to see everything, Sebastian. I want to see you choosing me above all else. My father opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. It was as if something inside him had broken definitively, as if the last resistance had been overcome. Go get her, Constance said, and now her voice was full of triumph. And it was at that moment that I realized I needed to run, that I needed to get out of there before he came looking for me. But my feet were glued to the floor, as if the horror of what was happening had completely paralyzed me. I heard his footsteps approaching the door, and only then was I able to move. I ran to my room, threw myself on the bed, and pretended to be asleep, my heart beating so hard I was sure it would explode. The door to my room opened slowly. I felt him standing there at the entrance, watching me. I tried to keep my breathing regular, to pretend I was in a deep sleep, but every fiber of my body was tense with terror. Rose, he called softly. I pretended to be waking up. I turned in bed, rubbing my eyes, like someone who had just woken up. Dad, what is it? What time is it? He stood there for a few seconds, just looking at me, and in the little light coming through the window, I saw that his face was wet with tears. I need to talk to you, he said. Your mother wants to speak with you. I got up from the bed on wobbly legs, pretending a sleepiness that was far from what I felt. My heart was racing, but I had to act as if I knew nothing, as if I hadn't heard that monstrous conversation. Isn't she doing well? I asked, putting all the innocence I could into my voice. My father didn't answer, just gestured for me to follow him. We walked down the short hallway of our house, and with each step, I felt the weight of what was to come. He was different, walking hunched over, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and his hands were shaking so much that he had to put them in his pockets. When we reached the bedroom door, he stopped. He stood there for a few seconds, breathing deeply, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. Rose, he said without looking at me, whatever happens now, you need to understand that I have no choice. Before I could ask what he meant by that, he opened the door and gently pushed me into the room. Constance was lying in bed, but she was awake and alert. Those green eyes glowed in the dimness with an intensity that made me want to run. She smiled when she saw me, But it wasn't a maternal smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just seen its prey enter the trap. "Hi, my daughter," she said, and her voice was strangely sweet. "Come here. Sit here on the bed with me." I looked at my father, seeking some explanation, but he was looking at the floor, his hands still trembling in his pockets. "What's going on?" I asked, but I obeyed and sat on the edge of the bed. Constance extended her hand and took mine. Her hand was cold, but the grip was firm. "Rose, my dear, you know I'm going to die soon." I nodded, not understanding where she was going with this. "And you know I love your father very much." I nodded again. "Then you'll understand what I'm going to ask now." My stomach contracted. Something in her tone, in the way she was speaking, told me that what would follow would be terrible. "Rose, I need you to do something very important for me. Something that will show your father how much I love him and how much he loves me." She squeezed my hand harder. "I want you to lie down here with me in bed and let your father love you the way he loves me." For a few seconds, the words made no sense in my head. It was as if she were speaking a foreign language. Then, when the meaning finally reached me, I felt a wave of nausea so strong that I had to swallow hard several times to avoid throwing up. "What?" I managed to whisper. "You heard me correctly, my daughter. Your father is going to show me how much he loves me, and you're going to help him do that." I tried to pull my hand away from hers, but she held me with a strength that didn't seem possible in someone so sick. "I don't understand," I lied, because in fact I understood very well, and the understanding was tearing me apart inside. "Of course you understand. You're not a child anymore, Rose. You're 17 years old, you have a woman's body, and now you're going to use that body for something very noble, to prove the love between your parents." I looked at my father desperately, searching for some sign that he was going to get me out of there, that he was going to protect me, that he was going to say this was madness, but he kept looking at the floor, tears silently streaming down his face. "Dad," I called, and my voice came out as a desperate whisper. He finally lifted his eyes and looked at me, and what I saw in those eyes completely broke me. I saw despair, I saw pain, I saw horror, but I also saw resignation. I saw that he had already made his decision. "I'm sorry, Rose," he murmured. "I'm sorry, but I can't lose her. I can't." "Dad, this isn't right," I managed to say, though my voice came out trembling with fear. "This is wrong. We can't." "Enough talk," Constance interrupted, and now her voice was harder. "Sebastian, are you going to do what needs to be done, or are you going to disappoint me on my deathbed?" My father closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, I saw that something inside him had died. The last spark of resistance, the last flicker of decency had gone out. "Take off your clothes," he said, and his voice came out like a moan of pain. "Dad, please," I began to beg, but Constance cut me off. "Do what he's telling you, Rose. Don't make this more difficult than it already is." I tried to get up from the bed, tried to run, but Constance held me with a strength that seemed supernatural. It was as if the proximity of death had given her an iron determination, a willpower that overcame any physical weakness. "Sebastian," she called without taking her eyes off me. "Help her." My father approached the bed with slow steps, like a man walking to his own hanging. When he got close to me, he extended his trembling hand in my direction. "Please," I begged, looking directly into his eyes. "Don't do this to me. I'm your daughter. I'm your daughter." He paused for a moment, his hand suspended in the air. I saw a terrible battle being fought in his face. For a second, I thought he was going to back down, that he was going to protect me, that the father I knew would resurface and end this nightmare. But then, Constance said, "Sebastian, you promised, you swore, you said you loved me more than anything." And it was as if those words had broken the last barrier inside him. The hand that was suspended in the air came down and touched my arm. "Forgive me," he whispered, and began to remove my nightgown. What happened next, folks? I can't describe in detail. Not because I don't remember. I remember every second, every moment, every sensation. I remember to this day, more than 50 years later. But because some things are too heavy to be put into words, what I can say is that I saw my father cry the entire time. I saw him ask for forgiveness repeatedly, his voice choked with sobs. I saw that he was suffering as much as I was, perhaps even more, because in addition to the physical pain, there was the moral pain, the pain of knowing he was destroying his own daughter to satisfy a dying woman. And Constance watched everything with those green eyes shining with satisfaction. Not shining with sexual pleasure. It wasn't that. It was the satisfaction of power, of absolute control, of having managed to bend a man to the point where he would do the unthinkable for her. It was the satisfaction of someone who had just won the most important game of her life. The whole time, she whispered things in my father's ear, things like, "Now I know you love me. This is proof of true love. No other man would do this for me." When it was over, my father rolled away from me and stayed there, curled up like a wounded animal, sobbing in a way I'll never forget. They were sobs that came from a very deep, very dark place, from where nothing returns. I remained motionless, staring at the ceiling, feeling as if my body was no longer mine, as if my soul had flown away and left only an empty shell on the bed. "There," Constance said, and her voice was full of terrible satisfaction. "Now I can die in peace." She turned her head in my direction and looked at me with something that might have been affection, but it was mixed with so much poison that it was impossible to be sure. "Thank you, my daughter. You just gave your mother the most precious gift there is, the certainty that she was truly loved." I tried to say something, but no sound came out. It was as if my voice had died along with everything else that was pure inside me. Constance turned to my father, who was still sobbing, facing the wall. "Sebastian, my love, come here." He didn't move. "Come here with me, my darling. Come give me a kiss." Slowly, as if each movement cost a piece of his soul, my father turned and dragged himself to her. Constance put her hand on his face, wiping away the tears. "Now I know," she whispered. "Now I'm sure you love me more than anything in this world. More than your daughter, more than your morality, more than your religion, more than yourself." She kissed him on the forehead, with a tenderness that grotesquely contrasted with what she had just done. "I can die happy now, Sebastian, because I know our love was real. It was absolute. It was greater than everything." My father couldn't stop crying. He was broken in a way I had never seen a human being broken. "Now lie down here next to me," she said. "Stay with me until I fall asleep." He obeyed as he always obeyed. He lay down next to her and hugged her, the two of them completely ignoring the fact that I was still there on the bed with them, naked, destroyed, turned to ashes. Constance closed her eyes with a smile of satisfaction on her lips. In a few minutes, she was asleep. I stayed there for a few more minutes, unable to move, unable to process what had happened. Then, when I finally managed to coordinate my movements, I got up from the bed slowly, picked up my nightgown from the floor, and left the room. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in, and vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach. Then I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried until I had no more tears. When I finally managed to leave, the house was silent. A heavy, loaded silence, as if even the walls were shocked by what they had witnessed. I went to my room, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling until the sun rose. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking, reliving every second, trying to understand how my life had been turned upside down in a single night. Constance died 3 days later. She died on a March morning, when the sun was still rising and the birds were singing as if nothing had changed in the world. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard my father scream her name, a desperate scream, full of panic, that made me drop the mug on the floor. I ran to the bedroom and found him shaking her body, trying to wake her, whispering her name repeatedly. But Constance was gone. The green eyes were closed forever, and on her face was an expression of peace that made me angry. She had gotten what she wanted. She had proven my father's sick love in the cruelest way possible, and now she could rest in peace, knowing she had won. My father collapsed, literally collapsed on top of her body, hugging her as if he could bring her back through the force of love. He cried in a way that made it seem like he would die right there, on that bed that had been the stage of our destruction. I stood at the door, watching that scene, and felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, no anger, nothing. It was as if something inside me had died along with her, and now I was just an empty shell, observing the world from afar. The funeral was small. Constance had never made many friends in Millfield. People had always been suspicious of her, always felt something was off. A few neighbors came out of politeness, my father's former boss, 2 or 3 people from the church, but it was a sad, silent funeral where people whispered among themselves and looked at me with pity. If they knew the truth, it wouldn't be pity they would be feeling. My father didn't leave the side of the coffin. He stood there, holding her cold hand, talking softly, as if she could still hear. I caught pieces of what he was saying. "Forgive me, Constance. I loved you too much. I don't know how I'll live without you." On the day of the burial, he almost threw himself into the grave with the coffin. He had to be held back by 2 men as he screamed that they couldn't let her go alone, that they should bury him with her. When we returned home after the burial, our new life began. A life that wasn't life, it was mere existence. The house fell silent. A heavy, suffocating silence, loaded with guilt and shame. My father and I lived there like 2 strangers who shared the same roof, but couldn't look each other in the eye. He stopped working completely. He would sit in the rocking chair that had been hers, staring at the wall, lost in thoughts that I didn't even want to imagine. Sometimes I would hear him talking to himself, as if she were still there. Other times I would find him crying for no apparent reason, the tears silently streaming down his face as he rocked in the chair. I took care of the house like a ghost. I made food that he hardly ate, washed clothes, swept, ironed, all on autopilot, without thinking, without feeling. It was easier that way. It was easier to pretend I was just a maid in a strange house than to remember that this broken man was my father. The first weeks were the worst. Every night I would hear him crying in the bedroom, talking to her as if she were there. "Constance, help me," he would say. "Tell me what to do now. Tell me how to live without you." And every night I would lie in my bed and stare at the ceiling, reliving that terrible night, feeling his hands on me again, seeing her green eyes shining with satisfaction. The nightmare would replay in my head every night, like a scratched record that couldn't skip to the next song. After a month, my father started drinking. Not much at first, just a sip here and there, to ease the pain, as he said. But gradually it increased, until it reached a point where he would wake up drinking and go to bed drinking. The liquor changed him. The gentle man I knew, even as broken as he was, completely disappeared. In his place was a bitter, explosive man who would yell over anything and break whatever was in front of him when anger took over. But the worst wasn't the yelling or the broken objects. The worst was the way he looked at me. In the first days after her death, he couldn't look at me properly. He would lower his head every time our eyes met, as if he couldn't bear the weight of guilt. But after he started drinking, the looks changed. There was something different in them. Something that gave me goosebumps and made my stomach turn. It was as if he were remembering that night, and worse still, as if he were enjoying the memory. One night, about 3 months after the funeral, he came to my room. I was almost asleep when I heard the door creak. I opened my eyes and saw his silhouette standing at the entrance, swaying slightly from the drink. "Rose," he called softly. I pretended to be asleep, but he came in anyway. He sat on the edge of my bed, and I smelled the strong odor of liquor mixed with the sour smell of sweat. "I know you're awake," he said. I continued pretending, but my heart was racing with fear. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he continued, and his voice was slurred, dragged out. "I keep thinking about that night, the last night with her." My blood froze. I keep thinking how happy she was, how she smiled afterwards, how she said she finally had proof that I loved her. He put his hand on my arm over the blanket, and I had to make a superhuman effort not to recoil. "And I keep wondering if I did it again, would she feel it? Would she see from heaven that I still love her?" I opened my eyes at once and sat up in bed, pushing his arm away. "Dad, you're drunk. Go to sleep." He looked at me with those red, glazed eyes, and for a moment I thought he was going to try something. But then he sighed deeply, got up, and left the room without saying another word. From that night on, I started locking my bedroom door. The months passed, and our coexistence became increasingly impossible. He drank more, talked to himself more, and the looks in my direction became increasingly strange, more loaded with an intention that terrified me. I stopped eating properly. I lost so much weight that my clothes became loose, and people on the street started commenting that I looked sick. But how could I explain that I was dying inside? That each day in that house was torture? That I was afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone with him, afraid that one night the drink would give him the courage to try to repeat what had happened. One day, about 6 months after Constance's death, a neighbor named Mrs. Sullivan came to our house. She had been one of the few people who had always been kind to me. And that day she looked at me differently, concerned. "Rose," she said when my father left to buy more whiskey, "are you okay? You don't look like you're okay." For a moment, I thought about telling her everything. I thought about opening my mouth and letting the whole truth come out, even knowing it would cause a scandal that would shake all of Millfield. But the words didn't come out. How could I explain something so monstrous? How could I make someone believe such a terrible story? "I'm just tired, Mrs. Sullivan. Taking care of the house alone, taking care of him, it's been difficult." She looked at me suspiciously, as if she knew there was more behind those words, but she didn't press. "Rose," she said before leaving, "if you need anything at all, you come to my house." "Do you promise?" I promised. But I knew I would never be able to ask for help. Some wounds are too deep to be healed by kind words and tea. Time passed, and I withered along with that house. It was as if the walls had absorbed all the pain, all the guilt, all the horror of what had happened, and now they gave it back in the form of a heavy atmosphere that suffocated us every day. My father kept drinking, kept talking to himself, kept looking at me in that way, and I kept locking the bedroom door, kept pretending to be asleep when he came prowling, kept dying a little bit each day, until one day, almost a year after her death, I realized I had two options. Either I left that house, or I would die in it. And that's when I made the most important decision of my life. The decision came on a December morning, almost a year after Constance's death. I was in the kitchen preparing coffee when my father came in staggering, still drunk from the night before. He looked at me in that way I knew all too well, the look that made me want to disappear, and said something that chilled me to the bone. "Rose, today marks 1 year since your mother died. I think she would like a tribute." At that moment, looking at that man who had once been my father, I understood there was no going back, that if I stayed in that house one more day, one more week, he would try to repeat that terrible night. And this time, without Constance there to watch, without the sick pretext of a test of love, it would be just what it really was. A crime. "I need to go out," I said, more to myself than to him. "What?" he asked, furrowing his brow. "I need to go to Mrs. Sullivan's house to get something." I lied, quickly leaving the kitchen before he could hold me back. But when I got to my room, instead of getting ready to go out, I sat on the bed and started crying. Not out of sadness, but out of sheer desperation, because I was 18 years old, had no money, had nowhere to go, didn't know anything beyond that small town. How was a girl like me going to manage to leave home and survive? That's when I remembered a conversation I had heard months before. Mrs. Sullivan had commented to a friend that a niece of hers had gone to work as a domestic in a family home in Louisville, and that the employer was good people, treated the maids right. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention, but now that information came back to my head like a lifeline. I packed some clothes in a small bag. I took the little money I had managed to save, selling some embroidery behind my father's back, and left the house. When I arrived at Mrs. Sullivan's house, she immediately realized something was very wrong. I must have had a terrible look on my face because she pulled me into the house quickly and closed the door. "Rose, for God's sake, what happened?" And then, folks, for the first time in almost a year, I opened my mouth and told her. Not everything. Some things are too heavy, even to speak about. But I told enough. I told that my father was drinking too much, that he was looking at me in a way that made me afraid, that I no longer felt safe in that house. Mrs. Sullivan was silent for a long time, just looking at me with those eyes full of understanding. Then she hugged me tightly and said, "My child, you can't continue living like this. A girl your age should have a life ahead of her, not be taking care of a drunk man who has lost his way." It was she who helped me get in touch with the niece in Louisville. It was she who lent me money for the bus ticket. And it was she who, when my father showed up at her house looking for me, said I had gone to visit a relative in Lexington and would return in a few days. In truth, I never returned. The bus journey to Louisville was the longest of my life. Not because of the distance, but because with each mile that took me away from Millfield, I felt as if I were being reborn, as if I were leaving behind not just that town, but that entire broken person I had become. When I arrived in Louisville, Mrs. Sullivan's niece, whose name was Claire, took me to the house where she worked. The employer, Mrs. Elsa, was a widowed lady who lived alone in a big house in the Highlands neighborhood. When she saw me, thin, frightened, with the look of someone who had been through a lot, she felt sorry for me and offered me a job on the spot. The first months were difficult. I would wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares, reliving that terrible night. There were days when I could barely eat, others when I would cry for no apparent reason. Mrs. Elsa, who was a very wise woman, noticed my suffering, but never pressured me to tell her anything. She just treated me with affection and gave me time to heal at my own pace. Slowly, very slowly, I began to recover. The work helped me keep my mind occupied, and the routine of the big house gave me a sense of order, of normalcy, that I hadn't had for a long time. Mrs. Elsa encouraged me to study at night, and gradually I made up for the years of school I had missed. It was in Louisville that I met Anthony, the man who became my husband. He was a delivery man for a neighborhood grocery store, a simple, hard-working man with a good heart, the complete opposite of what I had seen at home between my parents. At first, I was afraid to get involved with any man. The first few months that Anthony tried to court me, I would run away from him as if he were a ghost. But he was patient. He was gentle. He was everything I needed to learn, that not all men were like my father, that not all love was sick like what he felt for Constance. We got married 3 years after I moved to Louisville. It was a simple wedding in the neighborhood church with few guests. Mrs. Elsa was my matron of honor. She had become a second mother to me. I didn't invite anyone from Millfield. My past had remained buried there, along with Constance. I had 4 children with Anthony, 4 beautiful boys that I raised with all the love I didn't receive in my childhood. And when they grew up and had their own children, I became the grandmother I always wanted to have. Affectionate, present, protective. Anthony died 8 years ago of a heart attack. He died in his sleep without pain after a lifetime of honest work and true love. I cried a lot when he left, but they were tears of longing, not despair, because what we had was real. It was healthy. It was what love should be. Mutual care, respect, companionship. During all these years, I never returned to Millfield. I never had news of my father. Sometimes I wonder if he's still alive, how the rest of his life was, if he managed to stop drinking, if he understood the monstrosity of what he did. But these are thoughts that come and go quickly. I learned that some doors, when they close, should stay closed forever. Today, at 73 years old, looking back, I understand things I didn't understand at the time. I understand that my father wasn't a monster. He was a weak man who became completely lost in an obsessive love. This doesn't excuse what he did. It will never excuse it, but it helps me understand. Constance, on the other hand, Constance was the real evil in that story. She knew exactly what she was doing when she made that proposal on her deathbed. She knew she was destroying not just me, but him as well. And she did it anyway, because her sick ego, her need to be loved above all else, was greater than any maternal love she might feel for me. My parents' love wasn't real love. It was obsession, dependency, manipulation disguised as romance. True love protects, cares, elevates. What they had destroyed, demeaned, corrupted. I broke that cycle. When I left that house, when I chose to save myself instead of sinking with them, I broke a chain of suffering that could have been passed on to my children, to my grandchildren. My boys grew up in a home where love meant affection, where men and women respected each other, where no one had to prove anything to anyone through pain. Folks, I told this story not to shock you, not to cause controversy, but to show that sometimes the only way to save our lives is to have the courage to abandon those who should protect us. Sometimes the family that harms us doesn't deserve our loyalty. If you're going through a difficult situation at home, if someone is hurting you in the name of love, remember my story. Remember that I was an 18-year-old girl with no money, no education, not knowing the world, and yet I managed to start over. You can too. The life I built after that house was beautiful. It was full of true love, of laughter, of happy moments. My grandchildren fill me with pride. My children are good men, and I grew old knowing that I made the right choice. Sometimes saving our own lives is the most important act of love we can do, not just for ourselves, but for all the generations that come after. You know what I've learned in these 73 years of life? I've learned that we're born with clean hearts, full of hope, but sometimes life tests our ability to continue believing in good. And when that happens, when it seems like everything has collapsed, we have a choice. Either we let the darkness take over everything, or we decide that we're going to be our own light. I chose to be my own light. After everything I went through, I could have become a bitter person, angry at the world, unable to trust anyone. I could have carried that pain like a stone in my chest for the rest of my life. But you know what happened when I left that house? When I had the courage to start over, I discovered that pain can be transformed into strength. Each tear I shed in Louisville, each night I woke up haunted by nightmares, each moment I thought about giving up, all of that was shaping me into a stronger, more determined woman, more capable of recognizing true love when it arrived. And it did arrive, folks. It arrived in the form of Anthony, of my children, of my grandchildren, and now you who are listening to me and sharing your own pains in the comments. True love always comes to those who have the courage to leave the false behind. Today, when I look at my grandchildren playing in the backyard of my house, when I see them laughing without fear, growing up in a family where no one needs to prove love through suffering, I know that every day of pain was worth it, because I broke a chain, you know? I broke a cycle of pain that could have been repeated for generations. My children didn't know what it was to be afraid in their own home. My grandchildren don't know what obsessive love is, love that hurts, love that destroys. They only know the love that protects, that cares, that makes you grow. And that is my greatest pride, my greatest victory. If you're there on the other side of the screen, going through a difficult situation, if someone is hurting you in the name of love, if you think you don't have the strength to start over, I want you to look at my story and understand one thing. You are stronger than you imagine. I was a frightened 18-year-old girl with no money, no experience of the world, and I succeeded. I succeeded because inside each of us exists a strength that we don't even imagine we have. A strength that only appears when the situation becomes so desperate that the only option is to fight or sink. Don't be afraid to start over. Don't be afraid to leave behind people you love, but who are hurting you. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is having the courage to move away from those who should protect us. Life is a very precious thing, my darlings, too precious to be wasted in a place where you cannot shine. Everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves a chance to be happy, to be truly loved, to build a healthy family, whether of blood or of heart. Look at what I achieved. From a broken, traumatized girl with no prospects whatsoever, I became an accomplished woman, mother of 4 wonderful children, grandmother of 7 grandchildren who are the light of my life, and now a YouTube grandmother who has thousands of dear people like you. If I could do it, you can too. The difference between staying trapped in suffering and building a new life is a decision. A brave decision, sometimes painful, but liberating. Never give up on yourselves. Never accept that suffering is normal, that that's just how it has to be. It's not. Life can be beautiful, can be full of true love, can be full of moments that make it worth having fought to reach them. When I wake up in the morning in my little house here in Louisville, when I hear the birds singing, when I smell the fresh coffee, when I read your kind messages in the comments, I thank God every day for having had the courage to leave that cursed house. Because if I hadn't left, none of this would exist. I wouldn't be here talking to you, sharing stories, being part of the lives of so many good people. The courage to start over gave me an entire life of happiness, and it can give you one too. If Grandma Rose's story touched your heart, leave that sweet like down below and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Remember, you are stronger than you think and deserve to be truly loved. A kiss from Grandma Rose on the heart of each one of you.